Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 24th of July, 2017. Could you please stand for the opening prayer and acknowledgement of the original custodians of the land? Lord, we ask you that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today and pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. You may be seated. Recording and streaming of the meeting. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Thank you. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair and disclosure of political donations. I've not received any. Mr. Zachnich, have you received any?
No declarations received, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Disclosure of political donations. Thanks, Mr. Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This advice to the council meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Section 147 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council or a Council committee. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan, or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A, Part 6 of that Act. Matters appearing in the Planning Development Committee meeting minutes which require a planning decision to be made will be dealt with separately and immediately following the motion for the adoption of the Planning Development Committee meeting minutes. In respect to these matters, motions for a planning decision put before Council will be considered a division and recorded in accordance with Section 375A of the Local Government Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Apologies, CM4. We have Councillor Cameron as an apology. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move committee receive, note and accept the apology of committee of Councillor Darren Cameron and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM5, Merrill Minute, there isn't any. CM6, action plans, there are none for noting. CM7, the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, the 26th of June, 2017 at 6:01 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 26 June 2017 at 6 p.m. be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor
Be
Doxey.
confirmed. Sorry, my apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
I second both those motions.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, did you wish to speak to those at all?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. There being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM8, reports from council committees. CM8.1, report from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday, the 10th of July 2017. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, and I'll just wait for the correct wording so I get the correct wording. That I would like to recommend that council that the report from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday, the 10th of July 2017 at 6 p.m. Be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Gleick. I see that as the 11th, and it
I'll
should be the
just-
10th.
Check if...
My paper said say the 10th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gleick. And a seconder, Councillor Stutchbury.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Gleick, did you just speak to the...
No, thank you.
Thank you. There being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 8.2, report from the Engineering Works Committee meeting held on Monday, the 10th of July 2017 at 6:25 p.m. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As the acting chair for that particular meeting, while in the absence of Councillor Van der Ven, I am happy to recommend that the recommendations included in the report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday, the 10th of July 2017 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. The report from the Community and Cultural meeting held on Monday, the 17th of July 2007 at 6 p.m. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendations included in the report from the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday, 17th July be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Ven.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that at all?
I think, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The report from the Finance Administration Committee meeting held on Monday, the 17th of July 2007 at 6:20 p.m. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday, 17th of July be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Ven.
Again, happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
I thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. No question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM9, reports from the community forums. There are none. CM2, notice of motions, notices of rescission. CM10.1, Albury Waste Management Centre, construction of plant to deal with food and garden waste. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move that Council resolves, one, that in the event that the JRPP refuses the development application for the Cleanaway Organic Waste Management and Composting Facility at Howlong, Council indicate a preference for investigation of the construction of a plant to deal with food and garden waste at the Albury Waste Management Centre, and two, that in the event that the JRPP refuses the development application for the Cleanaway Organic Waste Management and Composting Facility at Howlong, the General Manager initiate negotiations with Cleanaway or any other interested party to progress investigation of the construction of a plant to deal with food and garden waste at the Albury Waste Management Centre.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Thurley.
Happy to second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury, happy to open debate?
I think I will. Just briefly, over the last period of time that this Cleanaway composting plant issue has been bubbling away, initially at Gerodgery and now at Howlong, I feel that AlburyCity has come under some unfair criticism in the press. And I would just like to remind all those that are willing to listen that when the original contract was drawn up, 5 councils, including Albury, all signed and agreed to it, all well aware that the composting plant may be built in their particular LGA. So it should have come as no surprise to citizens of Greater Hume or indeed Federation Shire that Cleanaway put in a DA for it. Having said that, I believe it's time that we take ownership of this issue and consider putting this composting plant in our LGA if the need arises for a third site to be located and approved. There's much to be said, I believe, for having a composting plant, or, if you like, a facility for dealing with food and garden waste. And I'd be keen, if it came to this, to explore all avenues for having it built in our LGA. Thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Glacken. Councillor Glacken?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. Can I ask staff, would it be possible for AlburyCity to house or facilitate such a site within our local government area, in so much as would it go outside any regulations that would be imposed upon us by the state government, etc.? And then I would like to speak to the motion at some stage as well.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. So the requirements would apply as they do elsewhere in New South Wales in terms of the establishment of these types of facilities. So the proponent would need to go through the normal planning processes in that regard, and so no different to any requirement elsewhere where there's obviously suitable land and zoning requirements align with the type of use that's proposed in terms of a composting and waste management facility.
I do indeed, thank you. To the most relevant member of staff, I'm very conscious of the fact that we have a finite space, land space at our waste facility, and that when this arrangement was agreed between the other shires and councils within our region, it was agreed that we would continue to take the landfill. The Halve Waste program has enabled us to extend the life of our waste facility, and I'm concerned that, and I would like the staff to confirm whether or not it will have an effect. I am concerned that such a facility at the Albury Waste Management Centre might conflict with our ability to be able to continue to extend the life of the waste facility. I could be wrong. I would like to be wrong, but I'm just very aware of our finite space within that area, and very conscious of the fact that we embarked on the Halve Waste program to ensure that we could continue the life of that facility in that location, Mr Mayor.
So the question is it going to compromise the lifetime of the facility?
That's one component. Will it fit on that site and still allow that site to have the life that we are expecting?
Yourself? Mr Zachnich?
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. So two points there, Councillor Glacken. So it would really depend on the footprint of the proposed composting facility at one point, and obviously the Halve Waste program seeks to reduce the amount of waste that is landfilled. A composting facility aligns with that sort of activity in that it's not about waste to landfill in that instance, it's about reuse and processing of the material on that site. So again, in terms of the footprint, would need to have regard to the area of land that's available and the type of composting process that's to be undertaken. All that would be part of the investigation process if this resolution were to be endorsed by the council.
Any further follow-up, Councillor Glacken? No. Just have 3 other questions. You happy to take those before you speak to or against the motion?
Yes, that's fine, and I will queue up again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dox, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mine is just following on to Councillor Glacken's second question, because it was the same question I was going to ask in a general term, and that was, I'm not sure exactly how much space we've actually got at our Waste Management Centre, and is this going to compromise our opportunity into the future? But the question I really got is that what happens to the end product given that it's come in from 4 other shires and councils? Is it going to be at our disadvantage? And is this going to cost us more than it is worth in our particular LGA? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Sacknage.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, they're the sort of issues that an investigation would highlight. In terms of it being, worth the proposal or worth the option, obviously the current process that Cleanaway is going through commits that organisation to processing the facility in a location in the region that it services. So that's no different in terms of what would be proposed at a site in the Albury LGA. The cost of that essentially is based on the contractual service that's currently provided. An interim arrangement is in place at the moment where the material is lightly sorted at Albury Waste Management Centre and then transported to Wagga for final processing. So again, we're talking about activity on the site that doesn't add to or reduce landfill life. The footprint that development might impose on that site would be a key part of the investigation.
Councillor Dox, do you have a follow-up on that, or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the past, we've had some odour complaints from our current facility. Is this likely to be resolved by simply putting a new facility onto the site, or is it likely to impact further? I know that's a how long's a piece of string question, but I think it's valid for the people that are living in that area. Thank you.
Mr. Sacknage.
Thanks for the question again, through you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of points there. The processing of green waste at the additional processing of green waste at the Albury Waste Management Centre, it was not the subject of the odour complaints. One major odour event in 2016. The cause of that was specifically related to extremely wet weather events and soakage and water on the site that led to that odour complaint. In terms of odour generally at the site, again, as part of the investigation, clearly any proposal to locate the composting facility at the Albury Waste Management Centre would need to have regard to any odour issues and how they might be managed if the proposal were to be located at that site or any other site in the Albury Lock Government area.
Did you have follow-up, Councillor Doxey, or not?
No, I'm happy with that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderwen, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I, with your indulgence, can I just preface my question with a couple of quick remarks? First of all, the contract that was signed probably 4 or 5 years ago, from the perspective of these 5 communities that were part of the contract with Cleanaway, this was really a fantastic community initiative to try and reduce the amount of waste going to landfill and to basically to extend the life of our waste management facility, but to provide some benefits from an environmental perspective. And if we just take this, I mean, I'm happy with this the way it is, but I don't think it goes far enough because if we lose the ability to do this composting, mate, the 5 years of work that we've done in the half waste is down the tube, and I for one would be absolutely appalled if that was to happen. My question, therefore, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your indulgence, is if, and these are hypotheticals because we're basically waiting for what the JRPP does, and then depending on that, what the residents of How Long might do. If this was to be progressed at the Albury Waste Management Centre, would AlburyCity then be part of any DA to put that there, and would the costs be shared by Albury City, or would the costs be purely at the attributed to a Cleanaway for putting that facility there? I'm just trying to get some idea of the scope of that particular question.
Mr. Sacknich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So in a general sense, the contractual requirement for Cleanaway is to locate and provide at their cost a compost processing facility within the region. So the initial discussion would be just that. If it were to be the Albury Waste Management Centre or any other centre in the Albury LGA, on the basis of that contractual obligation, that would be at Cleanaway's cost. Obviously, that's factored into the cost of the service to the participating councils. If we got to a situation where council wanted to be a more active or more willing partner in terms of alternative options for that composting facility, then that's perhaps a different conversation that we would have in addition to the negotiations that are suggested in part 2 of the motion.
Happy with that, Councillor Vanderman?
Yes, thank you. I'll just digest that. And
Thank you. Councillor King, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, to the relevant member of staff. Just want to clarify the waste from the 5 local LGAs comes to Albury. It's dumped at the Albury Waste Management Centre. It's taken to Wagga, and then it's processed through the Wagga City Council Waste Management facility. What happens to it then? Is it left on site, or is it sold, or is it a combination of lot? Is it sorted? And so clarification, does it all stay there and then rot away, or is it actually distributed amongst other projects?
Mr. Sacknich.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So just to clarify, the 4 LGAs that participate in the organics 3-bin system at present, the products collected, deposited at the Albury Waste Management Centre where it's lightly sorted. On the same day, it is then transported by heavy vehicle to a processing facility at Wagga, where a contractor processes that material. Materials obviously processed on site in terms of their composting process. That material then is available for resale or reuse, depending on the quality of the material that's produced. In fact, some of that material has been returned to Albury in recent times for reuse at local schools and a number of reserves. So that's the process as it currently occurs.
Follow up, Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So obviously this contractor is not doing it for nothing, and there could be a significant economic benefit to Albury if this was a initiative that we took on board. Would you think that it's a fair statement?
Mr. Sacknich.
Thanks for the offer to comment, through Mr. Mayor. That 2 components again. Because of the contractual obligation, Albury City and the other council partners are contributing to the development of the composting facility in accordance with the contract. So it's all part of the contractual obligation at present. So there would be no additional cost to any of the councils under that scenario where it was developed within the region. Alternatives in that regard, as I mentioned earlier, where council, Albury City in this case, would want to take a more proactive role in that scenario, that would be a different conversation and a different business case to develop. But at this stage, the contractual obligation is on Cleanaway to deliver this composting facility as per the contract within the region. Albury City could assist that to happen, but again, it would be in the initial contractual discussion with Cleanaway in order to deliver on the contractual obligations.
Thank you, Mr. Sacknich. Councillor Glocken, did you wish to ask a question or did you wish to start?
I do have a question.
Yeah, question,
In
yeah.
fact, I have two, if I may. The first is with reference to, through you to the most relevant member of staff, with reference to the second point being the second part of the motion, or any other interested party. Can I have an answer with reference to, or with regards to the relationship or the contractual relationship we have with the current provider, which is Cleanaway? My understanding would be that it's just not possible for us to negotiate with another interested party at this stage. However, I would like some guidance from the staff. And then I have another question after that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seknich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the negotiations or conversations would need to continue with Cleanaway, as you've indicated, Councillor Glacken, until that process is exhausted, which then Council would, again, once that process is exhausted, that may take some time in terms of various options and negotiation that takes place under the contractual obligations. But that's an opportunity at a later stage where there are other interested parties. But as you've indicated, the conversation...
with respects to both parts of the motion, at the moment it's indicating that it would be at the Albury Waste Management Centre. We want to make sure we get the best place, and if the idea is that it be within the Albury LGA and an appropriate space, it may not be able to have it at the Waste Management Centre. We may run out of space, so I'm suggesting that we look at including the wording or appropriate space within the Albury LGA.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Being the owner of some broadacre lifestyle land within the Albury LGA, I'd be quite happy for the wording to be changed, as you suggest.
So the wording would be, Councillor Glacken? Waste
Or other site.
or other alternative site within the Albury
Correct.
LGA.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Or other alternative site within the Albury local government area.
As the seconder, I'm also comfortable with that.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Oh, he didn't remind you. Okay, so we're happy to move on with that one. And Councillor Glacken, you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you. Yes, I, like Councillor Stutchbury, have over a period of years been disappointed with the bad or the appearance of bad press around the waste initiatives taken on by Albury and agreed to by other councils and shires within our region. It's been a regional initiative, and unfortunately the compost facility has been the sticking point, and I am surprised that this has been the sticking point, because this is probably the least onerous part of the whole contractual arrangement to be taking on. AlburyCity takes the region's hard waste and has to deal with the region's hard waste. We get, in my opinion, the worst deal of all of this. And I think that it has been such a shame that it hasn't been able to, a location hasn't been able to be found for the organics component of this regional solution to dealing with waste within our current experience, to try and halve the amount. In fact, I think we're achieving better, or we're well on the way to achieving better than being able to decrease the amount going to landfill by more than half. The organics component is something that is of benefit to, or can be of benefit to everyone, because we can reuse that component and it can be made into something that actually provides for the future. So I do believe that Albury would be fine to be able to take that component as well. But I just find it very disappointing that the other shires and councils haven't been able to assist with this. They're happy to come on board for Albury to take the waste and the lion's share of that waste, but they're not happy to help with the solution for what is the least onerous part, and that is the organics. So I think this is perhaps a little premature. I'd love to have the issue dealt with by the JRPP in a very positive way for our region, and I store great hope in that still happening. But should that not, I think this is an appropriate way forward. I regret that I do still, however, feel it's a little premature, but I do support this should the JRPP solution, current JRPP solution on the board, not be carried later this season. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. There being no further questions or speakers for or against, Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close debate on your motion?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a couple of brief comments, if I could. And these are more to go to a couple of the questions that were asked. Now, Councillor Doxey and Councillor King wondered about what happens to the compost and what the economics of it is. And I went to Dr. Google over the weekend. There's a site in New Zealand that uses the same technique as proposed by Cleanaway, which is an aerated static pile with a gore membrane. And the annual cost per tonne of processing the compost material is $82, and it can be sold for anywhere between, depending on the quality, $533 and $1,066 a tonne, representing, I would have thought, a reasonable profit as well as a good way of reducing the waste. And in regards to odour, that particular New Zealand site, which is the only one in the Southern Hemisphere, they had one odour complaint within the first year of running it, which was a technical error due to inexperience, and there's been nothing in the subsequent 10 years. So I don't really think that odour is as big an issue as has possibly been made out in the press by opponents to this composting process. So all in all, I think that if it gets to the stage of the How Long site not being able to be proceeded with, it is something that we should be very interested in ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Presentations and deputations, CM11, there aren't any. CM12, reports and minutes of committees and working parties, there are none. CM13, documents for sealing, there are none. And CM14, officers' reports for consideration. We have the AlburyCity Information Guide for 2017. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that Council adopt the draft AlburyCity Information Guide 2017.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Just briefly, if I can just preface that with a question. I noticed in the text of the background and the issues that an agency which is asked must notify the Information Commissioner before adopting or amending the Information Guide. And then also it says the Information Commissioner was notified of the proposed amendments. And I'm assuming, and you know what assuming does, that the Information Commissioner gave us the tick of approval to with the changes that we've made. So on that basis, it is appropriate that we update our Information Guide with the information that has been available through the ABS, with available legislation, new legislation, and as indicated, our new organisational structure and the structure within the tourism precinct as far as the new information guide or the updated information guide is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. There are no further speakers for or against. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.2, the Greater Hume Shire Council Management of Hume Villages Water Supply Scheme. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A agree to enter into discussions with Greater Hume Shire Council on the feasibility of Albury City taking control of the operation of the village's water supply scheme, and B, receive a future report on the findings of the feasibility study.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that?
Briefly, although I notice there is now a question, so if you're happy to take the question, I'll wait.
Okay. Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Yes, I do, and I must say I did have a bit of a chuckle over the weekend when I read this report, having also not long read the notice of motion for the for the organics component, that Greater Hume, there was an opportunity for Greater Hume to have the organics component within their local government area, and they didn't want it, but they would like us to look after their water. So my question is with regards to the last paragraph of page 40 in our report. It should be noted that Greater Hume Shire Council previously passed a similar motion to undertake discussions with Riverina Water in relation to the management and operations of their water supply. My question is, to the most relevant member staff, what was the outcome of those discussions?
Mr Zacknich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. No outcome at this stage. Those discussions are still ongoing.
Follow up, Councillor Glacken?
No, thank you.
Councillor Thurley, just open debate.
Very briefly, I mean, we've had presentations before about from Greater Hume Shire about the cost of water we supply them, and clearly they still have some concerns with the way the whole system operates. This is simply to investigate, report, and give us another option to decide whether we change what we do or leave it as it is. So at this stage, it's of no big note, really.
Councillor Vanderman, you have a question?
I'm just wondering, Mr Mayor, if one of our staff could give us what options that Greater Hume Shire Council have for water supply for those particular villages.
Mr Zacknich.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Not an expert in this area, Councillor Vanderman, but in recent years, the Greater Hume Shire have explored bores for each of those locations. Coal can supply is currently provided by a bore, but is not part of the village's water scheme. So they're the more recent options that have been explored. The other alternative, as has been indicated in the report, is a supply from Riverina Water extending or servicing the village's water scheme. Part of Greater Hume Shire is already serviced by Riverina Water, apart from the coal can supply, which, as I said, is a bore supply, and the village's water scheme currently supplied by through 2 metering points by AlburyCity.
Follow up, Councillor
Yeah,
Vanderman?
just a quick follow-up, not so much a follow-up, a new question. Is there any estimate of what sort of cost the in-depth assessment might be as far as AlburyCity is concerned, if any?
Mr Zacknich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question. Look, it'll be done by our internal resources, which will be allocated to our normal operating budget. But ideally, we'd have the report back to you well before the end of December for you to consider.
On that note, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. The CM 14.3 addendum to item CM 14.4 late submission of development application 10.2014.3319.3 bulk storage bunkers at 928 Metro Street, North Albury. Thank you, Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the contents of this report.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I second that.
Thank you. Councillor Conn, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. We're just noting a report at this stage, and I believe we'll have a substantive discussion for the next item.
Thank you. On that note, no further question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.4, the modification of development consent 10.2014.33199.3 928 Metro Street, North Albury. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of the report and B refuse consent to the modification of development application 10-2014-33199.2.
Thank you. So we'll wait for that to be amended on the screen. Do we need to
The word subject
withdraw
to
subject?
should all be removed.
Yeah. Just refuse consent to modification of development application 10.2014.33199.2. Will require reasons attached to that refusal.
I'm happy to give those reasons. They can be, basically, I have some notes in front of me by email, and it could be written that Council is not satisfied that the development as proposed to be modified is substantially the same development as the development for which consent was originally granted. And if approved, the modification will result in a development with greater amenity impacts, particularly in relation to noise, than those arising from the development approval under the original consent.
Did you wish to show the ladies that information, or have you got it?
No, not the third one, because that's after. The third point should also be that the wider range of materials to be processed represents significantly larger operations than the development approved under the original consent.
So you have an F as well? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. Yep. Righto.
We don't have a C and a D.
We'll just get the formatting right.
We'll just grab the formatting for you, Councillor Thurley, and we'll look
Yep.
for a seconder. So you're comfortable with that? If you wish to read that entirely,
Thank you,
Councillor Thurley?
Mayor, for the purpose of the recording, I will.
Yeah.
That Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B refuse consent to modification of development application 10.2014.33199.2, and the reasons being: 1, that Council as the consent authority is not satisfied that the development as proposed to be modified is substantially the same development as the development for which consent was originally granted under DA 10.2014.33199.1, and consequently refuses the application to modify under the provisions of section 96(2)A of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. 2, if approved, the proposed modification would result in a development with greater amenity impacts, particularly in relation to noise generation and traffic, than those arising from the development approved under the original consent, which is considered to be contrary to the provisions of section 96(2) and section 79(c)(1)(b) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And 3, the proposed increased hours of operation and wider range of materials to be processed represent significantly larger operations than the development approved under the original consent, which have not been adequately justified and are therefore contrary to the public interests under section 79(1)(c)(e) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury, happy to second?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second that.
Thank you. I've got a question. Councillor Thurley, happy for me to take the question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions through you, Mr Mayor, and I'm using because I'd made notes from the Planning and Development Committee agenda report, which is the same report, but just to refer to those pages.
You may refer to them, thanks.
Thank you. So with page 30 of the most recent Planning and Development Committee meeting, there's a sentence towards the top of the page that says the use of 928 Metry Street has been subject to a number of complaints over the last few years in relation to the emission of noise and impacts upon the occupants of adjoining properties. My question is, it isn't clear in that description whether it was one person making a number of complaints or a number of complainers making complaints.
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was more than one party involved in the complaints, but they related particularly to one property.
So one of the
So they're occupants on one property.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clacken.
Thank you, and I'll just get to the next bit. Two questions on page 40 of that document. And it refers to an attachment 10 to the Planning and Development Committee meeting, and they were graphs that indicated, it appeared to me to be indicating noise at night. Do those graphs really mean that that facility was operating at midnight?
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, for the purpose of trying to seek some clarity, you're referencing the noise logger graphs in Appendix B, Councillor Glacken?
For the Planning Committee meeting? Yeah, okay. They are 7.1.10, Attachment 10, Additional Noise Assessment.
That's the title of the report.
Yes.
Prepared by Marshall Day Acoustics? No?
I think it's the same report as C14.410.
Oh, sorry. It would be the Harwood Acoustics report and Appendix B where they show graphs there which measure the noise levels.
Yes, and so
That doesn't necessarily mean the operations on the site were occurring, but noise occurs, and particularly in that area, the background noise levels from the highway up around the 50 dB levels, and that could reflect what's shown there.
Okay, so for example, on Wednesday, the 1st of March, there's a couple of spikes. Looks like 12:30 in the morning and 1:30 in the morning.
It could well be a train. It could be an aircraft.
Those spikes, however, are higher at those two particular times than any other on that day.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can clarify, only marginally, and they were very short duration, which could suggest that it may have been a vehicle close to the site coming past. Could be a truck accessing any part of that area. It could be, without trying to cast aspersions, it could be somebody, a young person in a vehicle doing burnouts or the like in that area, which could evoke that sort of noise presence, but the operations were not occurring at that time.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And another question on that page down the bottom. I note that the suggestion has been that operations should be between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday. But there was also, on the bottom of that page, it's the last bullet point in the report says ancillary activities may be undertaken with all due care between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. on any day. Can I confirm that? Was the report suggesting that work could be undertaken on that site between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. 7 days a week? And could that ancillary work activities include doing other than loading of the 4 containers, or would it be they could do office work, etc.?
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to answer the second part of that question first off, the proposed conditions restricting the hours of operation between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. were the primary activities of loading and unloading and dealing with the scrap metal, which are the noise generating activities. Ancillary activities anticipated outside of that include some minor maintenance of those vehicles. It could be undertaking oil changes or undertaking minor works. It could be employees arriving and leaving the site, cleaning up, or undertaking paperwork as part of their duties, bearing in mind that the office premises for this operation are not located directly on the site, on this site.
So if I can just ask for clarification. So they could be doing work on the site, physical work, but not with the scrap metal, and So not loading, not processing, not moving it around. Thank you. Okay, I'm happy with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Third, you should open debate on this item.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, we've had, I don't know how many reports on this one, and if we go back right to the beginning, the initial approval was for recycling of swarf. And if I go to the Oxford English Dictionary, it says any fine waste produced by a machining operation in the form of strips or ribbons, filings of metals. It was never swarf. It was metal of any sort. When you see bulldozer tracks, when you see car bodies, when you see bits of fence, it was never swarf. And now we're told that a minor description change, it's not minor, it's a major description change to me. It never was swarf. And now we're told that it's bulk swarf, scrap metals and resultant waste metal materials from any reductive manufacturing process. That is also not a completely proper description of what's happening there. So we have a number of problems with the actual original consent and adherence to the consent conditions, and that concerns me. My biggest problem is noise. I believe that the application of the industrial noise policy in this respect is wrong. The report states that the measured and calculated noise levels do not display characteristics requiring modifying factor corrections. That is, in my opinion, completely wrong. There is impulsive noise on this site. When they drop scrap metal from a height into the bottom of the container, there is a loud crash. And under the industrial noise policy, that's called impulsive noise. It has a very high, rapid rise time and a very rapid decay. It's a loud bang. They then go on to concede that perhaps, if that's the case, then we need to apply a correction factor. But once again, that correction factor in the industrial noise policy is to add 5 decibels to the reading. And this is where I think they've got it wrong again, because they say the 5 dB correction would be applied only to this process and not to the overall operation of the site. That, to my mind, is completely wrong. What would be the point of saying this process is very quiet, it only operates at 50 dB, but every now and again there's a loud explosion, and we add 5 to 50. That 5 has got to be applied right across the site. And in that case, given that their calculated LEQs for 12 hours are 67 dBA, they exceed the amenity criteria by 2 dBA. So once again, we have a problem with noise, and I don't believe that the report is correct in the way they've interpreted the noise policy, and I did seek some independent evidence for that, and I'm satisfied that it is incorrectly applied. I believe that the motion is proper and reflects our concern at what is being proposed in Metry Street, and I would commend this motion to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Third. I have a speaker against. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do acknowledge that there is noise, and it was noisy when we visited that site on that day. However, it is an industrial area within our city, and we have to expect that industrial activity will be undertaken in industrial spaces. I think the recommendation that we did have, not the recommendation on the board, but the staff recommendation to approve with conditions was the appropriate way forward. I believe that limiting the hours, not agreeing to the hours that were originally requested, but to limit the hours was appropriate in that space. I would prefer us, rather than to be considering not allowing the request or the modification, I would prefer us to be tightening up on some of the conditions to allow this place to continue or to operate as they have requested. And that might be along the lines of limiting the weight and or size of the components being processed. So to further restrict, for example, can't remember, Councillor Thurley referred to, I think it was a car panel or caterpillar tracks being processed. So I would prefer us to be ensuring that the facility can expand, but not to exclude certain components within that expansion. So I will not be supporting this recommendation not to approve. I would prefer us to be able to approve industrial activities within an industrial space. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Clark, are you foreshadowing the original motion if this motion is lost?
Yes, with perhaps some tweaking to the conditions.
Thank you. I have one question from Councillor Vanderin. Councillor Vanderin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. The original motion that was up granting consent with conditions, can I just ask staff to provide us some information on whose responsibility it is for compliance with those conditions?
Mr. Keys?
Through you, Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the draft conditions that are proposed, with councillors being the consent authority, we would have the right and the responsibility to enforce those conditions.
Follow up, Councillor Vanderin or Mr. Sacknage?
Just to add to Mr. Keys's comments, the applicant, the developer, is responsible for maintaining those conditions first and foremost.
Okay, so just a follow-up question then. What incentives are there for the developer to comply with the conditions if we were to impose the conditions? What incentive is there for him to comply? And because I noticed in some of the documentation that they were doing some stuff at another site, I think it might have been 930, which they've said that they would cease to do after the 18th of July. I mean, it's almost like, you know, they've been caught doing something wrong and, oh, no, we'll stop it now for the purpose of the fact that we're going to, there's a council report coming up. So what incentive or disincentive is there for them to, to comply with all of the conditions?
Mr. Keys?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are a number of disincentives, if you shall use those terms, but essentially council has a number of options available to it to take enforcement action should they fail to comply with the conditions of consent. In particular, in this instance, one of the things that we do try to do is, whilst there's a development application before us, or even an application to modify a development consent, we try to work through that process to enable that assessment to be undertaken without the fear or fervour of any enforcement action being taken, to ensure that we get the appropriate result that we can stand on its own, and we get the outcomes at the end of the day about an appropriate assessment being completed. Where a consent has been issued and an applicant, through whatever means, does not comply with those conditions of consent, council may, for example, in the first instance, issue a penalty infringement notice, one for failure to comply with the conditions of consent. That can be fines of up to $6,000 for a company, $3,000 for individuals. And the same goes for undertaking works without consent. Alternatively, we can take action in the courts and seek to impose an order, and that can result in fines, but also, probably more importantly, and most importantly, where we do use it, is to have a court order for works to be undertaken, which also empowers council to go in and carry out the works on the property to ensure conditions of consent are complied with. Now, that may involve building works, it may involve demolition, depending on what the instances are, but it is supported by a court order. And failure to comply with that is a breach of a court order and can result in additional legal action or enforcement by the courts. In addition to that, there's also other impeachments that can occur through the Land and Environment Court, which is a separate class action that can invoke penalty offences of up to $100,000 for a corporation. In addition to that, there are other acts, depending on what the offence may be, under the Protection of the Environment and Operations Act, which relate to noise, water and air pollution, which council can undertake, and they have very significant and severe fines that can occur or be imposed depending on the severity of the actions that occur. They also include prevention notices that council can issue to have the action immediately ceased, prevent any of those instances occurring. So there is a wide variety of options available for council to undertake in enforcement action. Unfortunately, a lot of those may not be immediate, and they may take time to prove correct evidence, but also to show reasonable cause as to why that action should or shouldn't be taken. And that's part of the enforcement process that council undertakes. Depending on the circumstances and the situation, those decisions will be made at the time and actions taken as appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman.
extensive, answer to my question.
A speaker against, speaker for, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking for the refusal for consent. We all welcome businesses coming into town and growing. I just think that this business is growing and pushing the edge of the envelope in regards to the current location that they're in. This business appears to be heavy industrial from the visit that we've had and the type of trucks that are coming. I don't think it fits into the zone industrial, as the neighbours of these premises are typically cabinet makers and small business owners in commercial sheds. I think that the proponent has had a history of breaches of this, whether they've been enforced or not. They have been pushing the edge of the envelope, and I think if they should consider that if they're going to expand, that it won't be in the location that they are, and we could potentially be doing them a favour by actually refusing this, and they may look for alternative sites. So I'm committing the report to refuse the consent.
Thank you, Councillor King. Speaker against, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard substantially the information provided by Mr. Keys and the number of paths that we've got as a council to enforce the restrictions on the particular site. I was happy with the original motion because it restricted the hours, it restricted the days of operation also. I am pro-development, but not at all costs. This, I think, is an opportunity for us to allow a business to continue in its current site, providing we as a council and our compliance officers can police exactly what's going on with the site. I think the original motion, the way it restricted the use of the site, the hours and the days was sufficient, and this current motion, I think, is anti-competitive business currently as it stands right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak for the motion on the screen in front of us that has been put up by Councillor Thurley, and I just want to add briefly something that's not been mentioned up to this point, and that is safety. I too am pro-business, but I agree with Councillor King that I think this particular business has outgrown its current site and really needs to be given maximum assistance in perhaps moving to a more appropriate site, and that's something that we as a council could do. They are, by conducting their business on 3 adjacent blocks of land on a suburban street, requires them to drive heavy machinery out of one block along the street and into another, and this exposes other businesses and their employees in the street to danger. The size of the trucks, which are frequently parked for days on end, obstruct views of the street and the intersections and create risk of traffic accident. And I really believe that it's probably just down due to luck at present that there hasn't been a significant accident leading to injury. I really do believe that this business has outgrown its site, and therefore we should be supporting this particular motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. There being no further speakers for or against, I have a question from Mr. Keys. Mr. Keys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to clarify, if I can, this is an application to modify an existing consent. that council's proposing to vote on and make a decision on, it doesn't revoke the original consent. This is only for the changes that are proposed as part of this modification application. So the existing operations limited back to the defined definition of SWARF and the hours of operation that were originally approved, subject to the original conditions of consent and being complied with, will still be in operation and still be effective for this development on this site. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman.
So on the basis of the comment just made by Mr Keys, through you, Mr Mayor, am I to understand that the original consent was purely for SWARF and that no other metal can be now processed on that site? Is that my understanding, and is that the correct understanding of the current situation?
Mr Keys.
The original development application was for the storage and transport or treatment of SWARF, and the definition of that has been the issue that we have sought clarification on, and that's generated the application modify to seek to extend that definition to include scrap metal and other elements. We would anticipate that the true definition as we've applied it and understood it originally for being SWARF material, which has much less lower impacts in terms of noise, would be what would be applied and be expected to be conducted on the site.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak against the motion?
Yeah, briefly, Mr Mayor. On the basis of that, I can't support the current motion, where, as a council, we had a previous discussion on a previous item around our environmental footprint, if you like, as far as green waste is concerned. This business seeks to recycle materials and has a significant impact, if you like, on greenhouse gas emissions by recycling. Majority of their stuff is metal. Where that goes to be recycled doesn't really matter. We're not really shipping carbon offshore, but we're actually saving the planet from having to all the greenhouse gases to produce that material, because recycling is what we're all about. I mean, we're all supposed to be in this recycling mode. Everything that we can recycle, we should be recycling. I see this as, I mean, we're really talking at the margins, where Councillor Thurley had some fantastic arguments about why we should do this. But at the end of the day, we're talking about 2 dBA, and the maximum allowed is 75 dBA, and it's only 2 dBA over the average allowed. So we're talking at the margins. Yes, I think we can do something around mitigating the noise for the next door neighbour, who are the instigators of the majority of complaints, and I do understand their concerns. But I think there are things that can be done. So on the basis of the balance of evidence that has been presented tonight, I can't support the current report.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Thurley, just to close debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm fascinated to see that my motion is being painted as anti-development. For many years, I ran my own consulting company, and I was responsible for having a concrete sleeper factory built at Wagga, a feedlot at Henty, and a number of other industrial developments. I am in favour of industrial development, but there are policies that the developer must adhere to. And in this case, this proponent has not adhered to many of the conditions that are required. The POEO Act has a noise regulation, and they are in breach of those noise conditions, in my opinion. Nothing in what they propose would bring them back into line with the relevant criteria. And it seems to me that they can continue to operate using SWARF, but that was never what they did. If it was for a very short time. You go out there now, there are old car bodies, bits of fences, bits of roofing iron. It's a mess. It's not a development that I believe we should be approving. All very well to say we're all into recycling, we should recycle, great, but there are rules that come with that. It'd be like saying that when the newsprint mill starts doing recycling and using recycled products, well, we should give them a real hand up because they're using recycled material. Yes, but they still need to adhere to the requirements of the Planning Act, the Protection of the Environment Operations Act, and any other relevant statutes. On this occasion, I don't believe that this development does, and that's why I've moved this motion that we refuse consent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'll put the motion. Leave your hands raised. Thanks, Councillor. We're calling for a division. Those in favour, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King and Councillor Thurley. Those against, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Vanderman. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.5, New South Wales Government Land Negotiation Program, expression of interest. Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Waiting for the wording to come up on the screen. Thank you. I move that Council endorse preparation and lodgement of an expression of interest to participate in the New South Wales Government Land Negotiation Program by 18th of August 2017.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Con, just have a question. You happy to take that question?
Yes.
Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair, Mr Mayor, through you, to the most relevant member of staff. We have some areas, examples, listed on page 84. Can I ask, is the showgrounds also included as part of this land? Or
Ms Squire.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor. No, the showgrounds is actually Crown land that is managed by a trustee, which is not Albury City Council.
Follow up.
Yes, thank you. Through you, the follow-up question, is it possible to include the showground land as part of the discussion? Could we request that happen? Noting that there's, my understanding is that there is a study either being undertaken or proposed to be undertaken, and that's with regards to the showground space for, I can't remember what the word is you use for the big picture, master planning.
Plan.
Yeah.
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, this process isn't about council, through the expression of interest, identifying land it has an interest in. The first step in the process is that we express interest in participating in the process, and then the New South Wales Lands will seek approval from the other stakeholder parties that they're supportive of the same. Then we would undertake an assessment of land. The assessment applies to all land that is owned by the Crown across the LGA. So it isn't about necessarily selecting isolated land. It's about those four stakeholders working together to determine who might be best placed to own that land in the future. So certainly any Crown land that exists in the LGA, if we were to proceed through the process, would be considered.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor King, you have a question?
Yes, through the relevant member of staff. So where you say owned by the Crown land, is that by the government authorities attached to the New South Wales Government? So, for example, the State Rail Authority and the land next door to the old Bunnings.
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, my understanding is that it purely relates to land that's owned by Crown lands. So it won't include land that is leased to ARTC by New South Wales Trains, for example, in the rail corridor, and it won't include land like Department of Housing or Department of Education. It purely will be the land that the Crown Lands manages, owns and operates.
Follow up, Councillor King.
No follow-up.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate?
Only briefly, Mr. Mayor. I have reservations about the intentions of the state government in absolving themselves of Crown lands, but I think it would be very foolish for AlburyCity not to be a part of those negotiations. So given that it's happening, I strongly support Council participating in the negotiations, especially given there are some lands that are of significant interest to the community, recreational facilities and that sort of thing, that are in the interest of Council to pursue.
Thank you, Councillor Con. No further question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And the next item is the CM 14.7 Infrastructure Contributions Development Application. No, sorry, 14.6 CCTV Policy, Code of Practice and Standard Operating Procedure and Signage. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that Council A adopt the draft CCTV policy and draft CCTV Code of Practice and Standard Operating Procedure, including the amendments as presented, and place on the Public Policy Register, and B, adopt the draft CCTV signage subject to approval of the use of the New South Wales Police insignia by New South Wales Police. In the event that approval is not provided by New South Wales Police, the New South Wales Police insignia is to be replaced by the words "images shared with New South Wales Police."
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stutchbury.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Did you wish to open debate on that?
Again, briefly, Mr. Mayor, I think this is something that our whole community has been looking forward to. I know that as a council, we've had a lot of debates over the years about CCTV and its in place in our community, and it's great that we've got to this stage now with the system nearly up and running in Central Albury, and these are the administrative tools that we need around it to make sure it's as effective as it possibly can be. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. I have a question from Councillor Doxey. Will you speak for?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I strongly support this, and on behalf of Councillor Cameron, if he was here, I'm sure he would thank the federal government for their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There being no further question or debate, I have to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Now we've got CM 14.7 Infrastructure Contributions Development Application 102017.35417.1 Rotary Community Market Amenities Block Storage Area and Fencing 441 Kewell Street, South Albury. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the report, and B, grant a concession with regards to infrastructure contributions for development application number 10.2017.35417.1 in the amount of $12,249.60 on the basis there are no significant additional demands on existing infrastructure, and this will support and promote long-term community use of the facility.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Very happy to second the motion as proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open debate?
I think the reports indicate that this is a very positive community thing, and in removing this infrastructure contribution requirement, we facilitate it and help them to go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Glayton, wish to speak for the motion?
Yes, I thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I acknowledge that I shouldn't necessarily be speaking as a seconder in support of, in so much as we haven't had anyone indicate, I believe, to speak against. However, we, I believe, should be having facilities within this space, whether or not there's a community market there or not. I believe we should have toilet facilities. I also think that it's important to allow everyone in our community to be able to use those facilities, because at the end of the day, they need to be, people need them, they'll need to use them. And I shudder at the thought of us suggesting that we would charge out-of-towners for parking, or we would charge people to be able to utilise those facilities. And I think it's important, an important part of that infrastructure that we should be providing as our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glayton. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Division on that item Hands up. Councillor Stutchby, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Clark, and Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. Thank you. The motion is passed. Officer reports for noting, there are none. Delegates reports for noting, there are none. I haven't been made aware of any notice of urgent business, and we have no confidential matters. The meeting is concluded at 7:20 p.m. Thank you, councillors.